I'm going to refer you to a video that I made previously where I was plunking on my mandolin and also mentioning this this idea that there are jobs out there which you can be envious in a guilt-free way. One of the things I mentioned was a jet fighter pilot. And this was not last night, but the previous night. So it gets me thinking about coincidences. Let's start this slow with small coincidences. We had our kids program yesterday. We did Dream Catchers. It was a great program. It went well. Um, our youth were totally enjoyable. Great program. Good time around the story, the fire circle. They were into it. It went, as well as it possibly could. It's funny though that I had there was little hiccups again with employees, so I was one, possibly too short, because I like to have everyone on deck when we have the kids programs. And so, while we're working on doing what we're doing, it's odd because there were multiple families. There was actually quite a few families that came just as walkers that had kids that were just wild. And it seems funny that we can go day after day after day after day with just, visitors that are very in tune to walking in trails, not clowny or antsy or loud or, problematic in any ways from the viewpoint of a preserve. And when we have our kids program, and I'm short a couple employees, suddenly, out of the blue, and only during the period of time when our kids program is going on, we get car after car after car of loud, problematic people. Groups, the kind of kids that are, the parents are not watching them. Coincidence. Let's see here. During our kids program, there was a little dealio where a raccoon, and I don't know when, how soon before, had dug into a yellow jacket nest in proximity of the boardwalk. No one got stung, except for me. No one got stung, but it so happens when all this is going on, the raccoons had planned their little escapade that they're going to dig into a yellow jacket nest and get them all stirred up. So it was, and luckily no one got stung, except for me. The coincidence is, you notice that I was masterfully playing the mandolin the night before, and where did the yellow jackets attack me? My left hand. So it's going to be a while before my left hand feels like I can actually play an instrument again because it's swollen up. Coincidence number two. The big one, the pasty resistance. I'm speaking French here. And coincidences. And this really makes me wonder. It absolutely makes me wonder. And I'll get into the wonderment after this. As you remember, I was naming off a few jobs that people could have where you could, without guilt, say, I envy you. That is the greatest thing in the world. I'm checking in a couple gentlemen here, and they had a bearing, how people carry themselves, that was different than the vast majority of other people. And for some reason, the one gentleman, a very precise southern accent with very clear eyes. And if you're a people watcher, if you've been in multiple industries, including the military, especially because, it's like teachers, they can kind of tell their own. I mentioned after he asked, this is a really nice place to live. And I said, funny you should mention that, young man. He was actually my age. My wife and I were discussing, what kind of jobs can you get away with saying you envy? And I mentioned that I thought at one time race car drivers, would be just the coolest thing in the world. But then, sitting in a hot car all that time. But then I mentioned jet fighter pilot, and he just laughed. He goes, well, my buddy here was in the Army. He was K-9. He was in Afghanistan. And I'm a retired F-16 pilot. 22 years jet pilotry this gentleman had. And to top it off, the icing on the cake, the cherry on the sundae was, not only was he a retired jet fighter pilot, he taught in a little place in San Diego after his stint of jet pilotry at a special school that you might know as Top Gun. And so this coincidence was not one like, yeah, I was playing my mandolin and I got stung on my hand and I can't play for a few days. This was the ultimate coincidence that I was talking about coming up to a jet fighter pilot and saying, I envy you. I not only met a jet fighter pilot, I met an instructor at Top Gun. That was so cool. And yes, he was discussing it. He was discussing the difficulty because the modern jet fighter pilot is connected to the entire range of armament. They're connected to the tanks, they're connected to the mech infantry, they're connected to everything. Satellite imagery. And he said one problem is that there is so much information out there, you can't get tunnely. I guess that's jet fighter for, you know, concentrating on one thing, because you've got everything to concentrate on, including the dials, the gauges. And I was like, man, you guys are superhumans, because there's no way that, like, us normal people could ever keep track of all that stuff. And you could just tell this guy had like energy like the Energizer Bunny, and just sharp. I don't get how they do that. But then he started waxing poetic. He's like, in the beginning, when you start flying, you know, you're concentrating on all this, and slowly you morph into this creature that's like one with the airplane. He didn't use that language. That you're not even thinking about stuff. You're just in the nose, the front of that thing, in that bubble. And what you're thinking is what happens. Yes, he said, you can envy me because it was the greatest job in the world. The only thing that would have capped that whole escapade was if his friend was a fly fishing guide, because that was number 2 on my list. So I'm expecting a fly fishing guide. Now, coincidences. Butterfly effect, all this stuff. You have to wonder, suppose you're trapped in some kind of a thing, right? And you're tapping out with a rock or a piece of steel, you know, like these subtle little messages, or you're stranded somewhere and you've got this radio, you can't talk on it, but you just have to do like Morse code or something like that. You really have to wonder if, like, whatever is beyond this, you know, gives us these subtle messages, you know, that it's like, hey, you know, there's other things that you're not aware of. And with this series of coincidences, I can brush it off, you know, coincidences happen, but, you know, sometimes you really have to wonder, how often do you run into, like, a retired jet fighter pilot, instructor at Top Gun, after you were mentioning it just kind of haphazardly the night before, playing a mandolin, and then getting attacked by yellow jackets on your fingering hand, after raccoons just happen to ramble past this place and dig up their nests and cause them to be quite upset. Before the raccoons hit, I never detected it. I walked the trails all the time, never noticed the bees, but they were like really upset right next to the trail. The coincidence that we normally don't get runs of parents with wild kids until we're in the midst of a kids program and we're short-staffed. How many times have these coincidences happened in your life? You know, so with that, you notice, if you can see, the parking lot is empty. It's because I'm about to open the gate here. The effects of the Benadryl have worn off. Yesterday was a trial, let me tell you. I took Benadryl after the bee stings, and it was just tough to stay awake for the remainder of the day. But with coffee, there is hope. I hope you enjoyed this weird rambling video message, this message in a bottle. Have a good one. I appreciate your viewership. Have a good day. watch out for raccoons bearing bees.